Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome to our last edition of Simon Says for the year in 2024. So I've been going through our Elements of Creation series, looking at the bits and bobs that kind of make things up and how they're perfectly designed to allow our universe to exist in the way it's been made. So I'm going to finish things off today with vitamins and minerals, the little molecules that don't give us energy per se, but are vital in terms of doing the things our body needs, in terms of growth and development and running its processes along the way. And so this here is a lump of iron. And as I'm sure you're aware, iron is a metal. As I'm sure you're also aware, we need iron for our bodies to function. So you might have heard of dietary iron or my iron levels are low, but this is a lump of iron right here. And so I guess the question is this lump of iron the same as my iron levels are low in my body? Are they the same thing? And so I wondered that until I found out about the science stuff. And the answer to that is yes, but no. So it's the same stuff. It is still iron, it is still the same element, but the form of that element matters. The form of that element is different. And so it has some slightly different bonds, it's in a different form, and that's what allows our body to do its thing. And so this is metallic iron, which is elemental iron. And so its structure is a metallic crystal lattice, like we've looked at before. We've looked at some crystals this year, and in a sea of electrons, where the electrons kind of float around and jump between the elements, and they're kind of happy to do their thing. And that's what makes them great conductors of electricity, because those electrons can, excuse me, move around. Whereas the iron in biology in our bodies is positively ionized to become iron 2 plus. And so it's lost a couple of electrons for each element, and this makes it much more available and able to bond and do chemical reactions. It also makes it really soluble in water because of that partial charge we've looked at in water previously. And so that allows it to dissolve in water and it makes it available to bind to other compounds. So don't go munching on rocks, it's not good for you. But the iron in our body, in that ionized form, is very important and it's able to move around because of that solubility and ability to react in ways that we need it to. So that's just a primer of some of the things we look at. So we're going to look at different types of vitamins and minerals. Then we're going to look at what they do, because that's important too. And then we're going to have a look at how they're balanced and regulated in the body in terms of how much is enough. And then we'll have a look at what happens when things go wrong. All right, so let's have a look at some different types. So these are a selection of vitamins and minerals, by no means exhaustive. You've probably heard of each of these, seen them on the side of a packet or a multivitamin, something like that. And so the vitamins, we tend to give them names with a letter next to them, although they do have other real names like niacin, for example. And then the minerals, they tend to be just regular elements, and our body needs those little elemental things in the correct form in order to do the bits and bobs that it needs to do. So we're going to look at a selection of these. So let's start with some vitamins. So vitamin A, also known as beta carotene, like a carrot. So carrots are very high in vitamin A, and they're really important for our immunity and our sight and our skin health. So they help us to see and help us to keep us safe and our skin as well. Whereas vitamin B, it has a whole bunch of them. I think there's a B12, so I guess and there's at least 12 of them. There are a big series of subtypes of vitamins, but essentially their main job is to help us with energy and DNA production. And I'm a big fan of Vegemite, high in vitamin B, so that's good. Helps me to keep energetic. Vitamin C is a common one too. You might take it when you're feeling a cold coming on, for example, but actually has a number of roles in the body. It helps us to form collagen, which is a structural kind of squishy skeleton part of our skin and our flesh. And so when vitamin C is missing, cells get scurvy, their teeth fall out. It's because they can't make that collagen. But it's also an antioxidant, helps us to absorb iron, helps our immune system, and it's also valuable in neurotransmitter production. And so we might take it for immunity. It's had some limited evidence to show it can reduce the duration of a common cold, but has not been scientifically shown to help prevent colds or stop symptoms or anything like that. But it's not a bad thing to have around. Vitamin D is important for our muscle and bone health. So our body can synthesize that from other precursors when we're out in the sun. Very important for avoiding rickets and that sort of thing. Vitamin E is helpful across the board, antioxidants, vision, immunity, skin health. And vitamin K helps with bones and blood clotting. That's an important one, and they tend to give it to newborns just to make sure that all those important things are up and running from the get-go, just to be safe. So next we have some minerals, and like the vitamins, they have a wide range of functions as well. So most likely familiar with calcium in terms of helping us to have strong bones and teeth, but it also helps us to clot our blood when we've got a wound. It also plays a role in our nervous system and enzymes, and just generally in terms of helping to support action potential, where there's a flow of ions to cause a reaction in a cell. And so calcium's used for a lot of different things. And then there's iron, helps us to transport our oxygen, immunity as well. Zinc, also important with immunity as well as our growth. Sodium is involved with our blood pressure, pH, nervous system too. And a bit like calcium, it can be part of those action potentials. And there's magnesium, helps with bone health and energy. Potassium, muscle and nerve function, blood pressure. And then iodine and others help with hormone production. Then there's selenium and who knows how many others. So some are very, very, very small trace amounts, but some of these are quite prevalent throughout the body. And so that was very general. We're going to dive deep on a few specific ones. But before we do that, we're going to consider how the body actually deals with these things, because essentially we've got all these different chemicals floating around in our body. And our body actually cannot store many vitamins and minerals. Very few of them hang around for later. We can't stockpile them. So there are some fat soluble ones, so they accumulate in our fat stores because they can basically dissolve into our fat and they get stuck in us that way. Whereas any water soluble ones, they can only float around our blood until it gets filtered out by the kidneys and excreted as very expensive urine, as Sheldon would say. So what that means is we need to be constantly taking in these vitamins and minerals so that our bodies can do the things that it needs to do. And so that highlights to us the importance of a balanced diet, hence why scientists and nutritionists are always saying that. Whereas supplements like your vitamins, multivitamins, etc., they're typically only needed to fill a nutrition gap or if you've got a special medical need. So in the West, we actually eat a lot better than just about any people group at any point in history. Our diets do tend to be pretty nutrient rich, assuming you're not just filling yourself up on garbage all the time. And so multivitamins are less important than we think we might need, but you never know if there's going to be a tiny little gap that they might be able to fill. All right, so let's dig deeper into some of the roles and what do some of these vitamins do. So one we touched on previously in our proteins talk was phosphorylation. And so this is a process where a phosphate group, PO4, is added to a protein so it can do something. And so what it does is essentially activate or inactivate the protein because it makes it do a little wiggle, change its shape a little bit. And as we know in biology, its shape is often important to its function. And so it can actually regulate whether that protein will do its job or not. And so, for example, here we've got a kinase, it's being switched off, it's just kind of hanging around doing not much. But if that phosphate group comes in, it's now switched on and will activate, it will do its job. And in the example of a kinase, its job is to phosphorylate other proteins. So it might go and then turn on another protein, which is needed at a certain time. And conversely, you can have a kinase that's on. Sometimes it might be phosphorylated to turn it off. So it depends on the protein, depends on its site as to whether a PO4 group will turn it on or off. But essentially, this is one way that our body will regulate our genes because every single cell in our body has every single gene in your body in it. And so my toe is capable of growing teeth if the right genes are turned on, and I don't want teeth in my toes. And so it's important that our body can switch those genes on and off through many other factors, but phosphorylation is one way that it can control these. And so this process requires forming the ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and so it removes one of those phosphates to become ADP, a diphosphate. And so by investing that energy, it allows us to control actions of proteins in the body. And so phosphate being one of our minerals, of course, there's the link to today's talk. So next is where do I fit? Ion cofactors. And so an ion is an element that has a positive or negative charge due to a change in number of electrons. And often these can form or act as a catalyst in a chemical reaction for a protein enzyme. And so basically, these vitamins and minerals can participate to help some reactions speed up or even happen at all in the context of the body. So on the left-hand side here, I've got an enzyme. So this is a protein with a particular job. Its job might be to take these two things together and combine them. So two chemicals to make a different chemical. But what's needed is a cofactor, like a vitamin or a mineral to come on in here, and so it participates in the reaction. It helps out. Those two things are combined together. That's the enzyme's job. Whereas a cofactor has helped, and it might end up being a little bit different. And so ion cofactors are really important because they basically need to be present in order for some chemical reactions to happen. If we're deficient, if we don't have that ion cofactor, that vitamin or mineral, that part of the body might not be able to do its job anymore. And so some good examples of ion cofactors are iron in hemoglobin, helps us with oxygen, magnesium and chlorophyll for plants, and also vitamin C, as we mentioned before, because it's required as a cofactor to synthesize collagen, our structural makeup in terms of flesh and tissue. So yeah, they help us to participate in reactions so the bodies can do the job that it needs to do. And so this is one example here of a cofactor. So I've got a little tiny Fe here. Fe is a chemical symbol for iron. So there's one little bit of iron and it's supported by this big structure, this heme ring or porphyrin ring. And this ring is actually held in an even larger structure, a giant complex protein. But its job is to pick up oxygen. We can see here on the right-hand side, those little in the red there, it's picked up a little bit of oxygen. And so the iron acts as the cofactor, which is where the oxygen will bind. So that's what allows it to pick it up. And this big structure is what's present in red blood cells to allow us to pick up oxygen from the lungs and then transport it around the body and deliver that oxygen to where it's needed to help our cells to make energy and do their job. And so this big complex structure with that mineral cofactor is what allows the body to do its job of picking up that one little oxygen in order to go. And so it's interesting that we see this shape in both animals and plants. So the hemoglobin on the left, that's part of our red blood cells to help us to pick up iron. That same structure of those pentagons and hexagons is seen in chlorophyll in plants, important for photosynthesis. But instead of iron being our mineral in the middle, we have magnesium instead. So it's interesting how God likes to reuse his designs. If something works and it ain't broke, he's not going to fix it. He's going to make good use of it all the way. All right, so the next one is mineralization of bones. So minerals are really important in terms of our bone strength. So particularly calcium, for example. And so this on the right-hand side, this is a little microscope image of a bit of bone that's been sliced and then dyed so that we can see the different parts of the bone. And so the bone matrix we call it is about 25% water, 25% organic living type things, proteins like collagen, and 50% mineralized salts made up from calcium and phosphate. And we call this hydroxyapatite. And so roughly our bone is kind of, you can think of it as being like half living, half mineral, like a rock, so to speak. And so we've got these parts in the bone, which are the matrix, which give it the strength. And then we've got these other cells floating around that are living, doing the functions of the bone as a living tissue. And so being this hybrid of living tissue and like rock, if you will, it gives us that great strength while still being part of our body, still being a living thing, helps us to make our red blood cells and do other jobs in the body as well. Yeah, so that bone matrix provides the strength while the living cells do the job. But interestingly, the mineralization is constantly in flux. We don't just dump a bunch of calcium and phosphate in the bones. There we go, bone done, off we go. Our bones are constantly shifting and changing and remodeling. And so our body will actually strip calcium out of the bones and put it in the bloodstream if it needs calcium to send to cells somewhere else. So it can actually respond and react to a need for calcium in the body. Whereas if there's heaps of calcium in the blood, the body's like, well, I've got plenty here. Let's just store it in the bones for later. Or if we're like, hang on, we need more strength in the bones, we need to pump more minerals into the bones in order to do that. And so that's constantly in flux in the bloodstream. We kind of think of our bones as static, but they're actually constantly changing. So speaking of constant change, our body needs to balance these processes so that everything is in the right place at the right time. And so one example is minerals in the blood. So we've talked about the blood a little bit already. And so lots of things travel around our blood. The blood's like the highway of our body. We take in food, we take in things, they enter the bloodstream, then they'll either go to the cells where they're needed, go somewhere to be stored, or they'll go somewhere to be excreted because they're waste. And so our blood is made up of a whole range of things as a result. We tend to think of it as the red stuff for red blood cells and energy, but there's a bit more to it. And so the red blood cells make up 45% of the blood volume. A tiny little 1% is our buffy coat of the white blood cells and platelets. So they help with our clotting and immunity. Whereas the rest is what we call the plasma. That's just the liquidy bit where we have salts and those minerals dissolve. There's a watery part to make it a liquid, obviously. And then the proteins, where the proteins have jobs to do as well. And so if you were to stick blood in a centrifuge in a tube like this, spin it around really, really fast, it will actually look like this. The heavy blood cells, the red blood cells are heavy, so they'll be spun to the bottom as a result of that centrifugal force, followed by the blood cells, whereas the watery bit at the top is going to remain there, floating on top pretty much, and it's yellow because of those other things that are dissolved in it as well. So there's lots going on in the blood, including the minerals and vitamins that we've been talking about. And so, like I alluded to with the blood before, these levels are finely tuned and they're balanced and controlled by hormones. And so, we need certain amounts in our blood. We also need to deliver certain amounts of other things to our cells. We need certain things to be stored. And so, there's this constant in and out flux of our body responding to the needs of the body and also the intake of our diet. And so one example of this is with regards into excess salts. And so if you've eaten a very salty meal, we know that too much salt, too much sodium is not a good thing. And the reason for that is it can actually raise our blood pressure. Well, that's one reason for it. And so if there's more salt in our diet, that ends up in our bloodstream. And salt, being a mineral, will actually trigger osmosis, which is the spontaneous movement of water across a permeable membrane. And so basically what happens if there's lots of salt mineral in your bloodstream, the water in the tissues around your blood will actually come and leave the cells, the tissues of your body, move into your bloodstream to be where that mineral is. That's what osmosis is, water essentially seeking minerals to dilute them. And so what we end up with is more water entering the bloodstream, more liquid. And so because we're jamming more stuff in your blood arteries and veins, that increases your blood pressure. And as we know, that can have negative health effects. And so by reducing the salt intake, not so much water is going to be diverted from our tissues into the bloodstream, and that helps our blood pressure to stay at a reasonable level. All right, so it's not just blood pressure and salts that we're worried about. As I mentioned before, there's calcium levels in the blood, there's phosphorus levels in the blood, and our body's always in this constant state of trying to level things and get them right. And so, for example, if we were to have too much phosphorus in our blood due to food, so we've eaten a high phosphorus meal and we've not had enough vitamin D potentially, maybe haven't been out in the sun enough, maybe our kidneys have been damaged, this would cause our body to excrete the parathyroid hormone. So the parathyroid gland lives up here in our neck and it spits out a hormone, spits it out into the bloodstream, travels around the body, and then that hormone tells our body to do things. And so in the case of parathyroid hormone, once that reaches our bones, it tells the bones to begin demineralization. So to basically eject calcium out of the bone, weakening the bone, putting it in the blood so that it can be directed to somewhere else. And so we'll have calcium in our bloodstream for it to be sent somewhere else. And we'll also send a message to the kidneys saying, hang on, don't urinate any calcium. We need to hang on to that, please, so it can continue circulating in the blood. And so this hormone allows us to increase the amount of calcium in the blood so that it can be directed elsewhere. And so obviously stripping our bones like that in the long term is going to be bad, so that needs to be balanced. And so the parathyroid hormone in this action is opposed completely and oppositely by a different hormone called calcitonin. And so at different times, our body will excrete the parathyroid hormone to get more calcium into the blood out of the bones. And other times, calcitonin will be excreted saying, hey, let's get some calcium out of the blood back into the bones to build them up. And so the body will excrete one hormone or the other in order to cause that resulting balance as it's needed. All right, so we've talked about balance, and as you may have guessed by this point, when the balance goes wrong, we get problems. And so, basically, resulting from this, one possibility is osteoporosis. So, osteoporosis, so pores in the bone, osteobone, porous. And so, basically, it ends up in reduced mineralization of the bone, which weakens its strength. So, basically, there's less of those minerals in that matrix. There's still the living cells doing all their thing, but they don't have that strength of that rocky mineral around it. And so the normal bone might look like this. We still expect some holes. That's okay. That's what we need in order to do its job. But osteoporosis is too much holes, not enough strength, um, poor engineering, not enough structural integrity. And so this can result in weak bones, which can then break much more easily. And so this can result from a number of different things. So, for example, reduced levels of estrogen or testosterone, so they're the male and female sex hormones. They can impact calcitonin and parathyroid hormone in turn, so causing them to do their job in a way that's not ideal. There may be gland issues where a gland's out of control. It's expressing too much of a certain hormone or not enough of another hormone. And so, if they're not producing those hormone signals in the right amount, that results in the wrong balance being produced. And it can also be a result of reduced weight bearing. So, our bones will actually respond to stress. And so, if you're putting forces on your bones by lifting weights or doing physical activity, your bones will realize, oh, hang on, they're working me. I need more strength, please, so I can deal with these forces. And so by purposely putting forces on your body by doing exercise and resistance weight bearing exercise, that's a signal to your body that, hey, we need to take more calcium out of the bloodstream to build the bones up to be stronger. And so exercise is an important way of supporting and combating osteoporosis. But depending on what issues are at play, that alone cannot be enough. Sometimes you need obviously to take in more minerals, have more phosphorus, more calcium, more vitamin D in your diet, so that your body actually has the materials that it needs to build up and strengthen your bone. Or if there are other issues going on, they can also be treated with a chemical called bisphosphonates. So that'd be a drug that you take, and it chemically prevents those minerals from being leached out of your bones, taken into the body. So it kind of locks them into your bones, so they can't be stolen away by whatever issues going on there. And by locking the minerals in the bones, it helps them to retain their strength. But yeah, osteoporosis, a nasty one if that balance isn't working quite as it should. Another one is anemia. So anemia is when iron levels are insufficient. And so we know that we need ions to go in that little heme ring, that porphyrin ring, to be part of the protein structure in red blood cells so they can carry oxygen around the body. And so if the body doesn't have enough iron, it cannot make enough red blood cells to do that job. And so a patient with anemia will actually have less red blood cells in their blood. So you can see in the graphic here, there's less of them. There's still a bunch there, but basically not enough. And so it can be a result of, inadequate intake of iron in the diet, not getting enough in. It might be a case of losing too much iron. So the body doesn't have enough iron to do the job. This might be from natural causes, it might be from another chronic issue or medications, diet, could be a range of factors. And so there's a higher risk in women because when they menstruate, they're losing more blood and therefore iron and red blood cells. And so that needs to be replenished. And it can also be more common in the elderly, for example, whose bodies may not be able to do the processing that it might normally do as efficiently. And so when that iron isn't there, the body can't take in as much oxygen to move around the body to create energy. And so they end up being deficient in energy as a result, very tired, very lethargic. Then lastly, we have deficiency of vitamin A. So there's an interesting case of a patient, a 55-year-old woman, who came to her doctor saying, I'm blind at night. I'm fine during the day and I've been fine before, but just suddenly, just randomly, I can't see very well at all at night. There's no prior family history of blindness, eye issues, night blindness. What was going on? So they dug into her health history and they found that this woman had Crohn's disease and she'd had three bowel resections. So she had less ability to absorb nutrients from her food as a result of that Crohn's disease. And so as a result, she wasn't able to absorb enough vitamin A from her diet. She had a vitamin A deficiency. And so vitamin A plays a key role in helping us to see at night. And so as this graphic shows, someone with night blindness will literally see less at night. It'll be like it's darker, they'll see less details. So I touched on in a previous Simon Says, saying that there's basically two different types of receptors in the eye. One handles all the colors, that's all they do. Another one handles the light and shade and shapes and details. And so at night, color is not a big deal. So basically, the light and dark and details is basically entirely what our night vision is based on. And vitamin A is crucial to these receptors and their formation. And so without that vitamin to maintain those receptors, we lost the ability to see that detail at night when color wasn't as big a deal, even though we could see during the day just fine. And so that vitamin A deficiency, as a result of being unable to absorb it due to digestive issues, presented in this night blindness that seemingly came out of nowhere. All right, so there we have it. We've looked at different types of vitamin and minerals in the body, just had a look at some regular common ones. We've had a look at what they do, doing a deep dive on a field or specific ones and their roles. We've then looked at how the body carefully balances them and how God's designed them to keep things exactly as they need to be, balanced on a knife edge at all times. And we've had a look at, yeah, we live in a sinful world where things go wrong, including our bodies, unfortunately, and as a result, we can see some negative side effects of that. So thank you once again for listening. I pray you got something out of Simon Says this year, looking at our elements of creation, seeing how God has made specific chemicals and elements and things in a way to do their specific jobs so that we can have life as we know it. So appreciate the support as always. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you another time.